Good morning. Hope everyone is well. Today we're learning Maseches Kesubos Daf Lamed Aleph, and we're starting at the top line. We'll be learning today until the 2 dots, 5 lines from the bottom on Lamed Aleph and Beis. The Gemara opens on the top of Lamed Aleph with a statement of Rav Chisda Gufa. We had previously learned yesterday. We saw this quoted Amar Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda taught us the following: that Moder Rav Nechunya ben Akana begonev chelbo shel chavero ve'achlo shu chayev. That if a person stole the chalev of his friend, and then he subsequently ate them, he agrees that he'd be chayev for both activities. One for the grand avera for eating chalev, which is a major isser, and the other for the tashlumin, which is a lesser isser. He'd be chayev on both. Why? Because the only time we employ the rule of kamle b'derabamine is when there is a simultaneous moment in which both things were enacted. However, here shekvar nischai b'gneva kodem shavali de isser chalev, but here the gneva was triggered before the achilas. Chalev was triggered. Fine, that's the shita of Rav Chisda. Says the Gemara, Lema, perhaps we should be able to say that pliga de Rav Avin. Maybe Rabbi Avin doesn't agree with this principle. Why would we say that that's a possibility? Because the Gemara says as follows: Dam Rabbi Avin, hazorek chetz mitchilas arba lesof arba. If a person takes a spear or an arrow and throws it or shoots it, and they do so more, and the arrow shoots more than 4 amos birshus harabim, which is a violation of the Isser of Hotzah on Shabbos, and while in the air, the karashi roin bahalichaso, it also then tears a garment while it's flying. So the arrow pierces someone's clothing, not that they're wearing it; it's hanging on a laundry line. The halacha is pater. These two things are viewed as separate activities. Shakira. They're viewed as singular activities. They're viewed as happening in the same exact moment. That when the person pulled back the bow and arrow and they launched it, the second they let it go, that was an akira. The hanacha is an automatic result, gravity, just the way things are. And therefore, the action of the violation of Shabbos and the action of ruining someone's garment happened in the same moment. So maybe we should say, and maybe Reb Avin doesn't agree with Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda was of the opinion that the taking of the chalev and the eating of the chalev, the gneva and the achila, were sequential and not simultaneous. Maybe Rav Avin would argue that it's really just the beginning of the end when we pick up the chalev. So therefore, hachanami hagbat tzorach achilahi. Maybe when I grab the food from my friend, the chalev, I grab it from his property, that the grabbing from the property really is the beginning of the achila. Says the Gemara, not a good argument. 10 lines down, Lamed Aleph, Amud Aleph, can't be hachi hashta. How can you say such a thing? How can you compare the case of the chalev to the case of the arrow flying through the air? Hasam, over there by the arrow, there's no such thing as the arrow coming to rest without having done the akira in the first place of launching it. It's two sides of the same coin. You cannot separate those activities. But hacha, in regards to the case when I'm stealing chalev from someone, efshar le'achila below hagba, I'm able to eat it without picking it up. I could literally fold myself over and eat from the plate. It's not polite, but it's doable. So it's not necessarily the case that I have to first steal the item. And therefore, maybe this case is not comparable to our case of the arrow, of Rav Avin's case of the arrow. Inami, another reason as to why this comparison is not a good comparison, the comparison between our case of stealing chalev and then eating it, and then launching an arrow on Shabbos b'reshus harabim and ruining clothes along the way, because inami hasam ibai la'ahadura lo mati mahadirala. Once you launch the arrow, there's no way to retract the arrow. That's not possible. But hacha mati mahadirla. But in our case, when a person is hacha, but in our case, it is mati mahadirle, the one is able to retract. Let's say that I steal something. So if I steal something, then mati mahadirle, then I can always put it back. It's not an automatic result that if I steal something, it will therefore be eaten. So therefore, no comparison. Ma'ika bein hai lishna l'hai lishna. What is the difference between these two lishonos, these two differences between the cases of the chalev and the case of the arrow? So Ika Beinaihu, says the Gemara, just about halfway down, Ika Beinaihu hamavir sakin birshus harabim v'karashi rain b'halichaso. Let's say that a person is carrying a knife, and as they're carrying a knife in a reshus harabim, if they walk dalet amos birshus harabim, then they violated hotzah. And if while they're carrying that knife, it cuts some clothing on a laundry line, then then they've ruined that piece of clothing too. So how does this show as a distinction between the two cases? Here you're already walking with the knife. There's only you have to stop at some point, but you've already started walking. The hanacha is automatic to the akira. So hachanami yefshar lahanacha below akira. But lahach lishna de'amris lo matzi mahadar lo, according to the language that there's a difference between the case of the chaylev and the case of the arrow, in that you're not able to go back. That's not necessarily true. I can always turn around with the knife that I'm carrying while I'm walking and put it back. So in short, the Gemara tried to show that Rabbi Avin was a major distinction and divergent opinion from Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana. The Gemara doesn't seem to think that it's really comparable. You can't compare the case of shooting an arrow, which then damages clothing, to the case of stealing chaylev, which you will then later eat. One is not necessarily related to the other. And on that note, the Gemara continues with a famous Shas sugya. I remember learning this. I remember where I was standing learning parts of this sugya in yeshiva in Shalvim 23 years ago, long time ago. I remember where I was. It's a very good Shas sugya. It speaks about different types of kinyanim and its interface with kamle b'derabamine. Says the Gemara halfway down on Lamed Aleph Gufa. Amar Rabbi Avin. We just spoke about this case, but we're going to analyze it now from a different angle. Hazorek chetz mitchilas arba lasof arba. Person shoots an arrow b'reshus harabim, standing at ground zero, and they shoot 4 amos. That's how far the arrow goes, at least that long. And while the arrow is in the air, it pierces some clothing on a laundry line and ruins them. The halacha is pater. That's the case of kamle b'derabamine. You did one action which led to 2 isurim, so we only give the greater punishment. Pater, says the Gemara, you're going to be pater on the lesser crime of the tashlumin of having damaged clothing. She'akira tzorech hanachahi, because when you did the akira, when you shot the arrow, the hanacha was automatic, and in between the akira and the hanacha, you pierced the clothing with your arrow. However, says the Gemara, Masi Rav Bibi bar Abaye, if that's true, then we need to understand this following brisa. This brisa has its roots in Maseches Baba Basra, and quoted here as well. Hagonev kis b'Shabbos. Let's say that a person steals a purse of money on Shabbos. The halacha is chayiv. He does 2 things wrong. He steals it and he did it on Shabbos. So first, the stealing is geneva, and then as well on Shabbos to transfer it from one. What?
They're not
the Gemara, that's what we're discussing. Exactly right. So if you steal something on Shabbos and you also change reshuyos on Shabbos, so you have geneva and you have hotzah. So it says the Gemara chayiv. We view them not being simultaneously. And that's not kamle b'derabamine, and you're chayiv on both. Why? Because while I was in the house, I picked up your purse. I made a kinyan on that purse of money, and that's geneva. And then 30 seconds later, I walked out of the house from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim. That's my Yisur Shabbos. So therefore, you're chayiv on both, because kamle b'derabamine only applies when the act is simultaneous. This is not a simultaneous act. However, says the Gemara in the second part of this brisa, let's say that I never picked up the purse. I'm dragging it. I tied a string around it and I'm pulling it like a puppy. Well, you don't pull puppies. Puppies walk, but you get the point. Something that you drag with a rope. So you're taking the rope and the purse is on the other end and you're dragging it. I never picked it up. There, what happens? The moment that I cross the threshold of the door of your house into the Rishus Harabim, 2 things happen. At the same moment, you violated Hilchos Shabbos, and you stole. There, says the Brisa, pater, because that's when we employ the rules of kamle b'derabamine. I did 2 things at once. While I'm dragging the purse across the floor, in such a case, I didn't yet break Shabbos because that's not a kinyan. In order to make a kinyan on something, we have to follow the rules. For example, hagbah. When you make a kinyan on something, you do a kinyan hagbah. You raise it up, you pick it up, you do something. Here, the purse never left the floor. I tied a string around it, and I'm just dragging. I'm holding the string up here, and I'm just dragging it. The bag's on the floor. I didn't make a kinyan yet. So when the bag crosses the threshold of the house, then I violate 2 things. I violate hotzah by going from a Rishus HaYachid to a Rishus HaRabim, which we're going to discuss on the Amud Beis. And as well, at that moment that it crosses the threshold, the same moment, I've also stolen. So there we say pater, Sharei Isser Shabbos, Vigneva, Boin Ke'echad. Very good. That's the brisa. What's the problem with this brisa? Says the Gemara, ve'amai, and Rashi tells us that we're going on the ratio of the Gemara. Why would you be chayiv in the ratio? What's the problem with that? Hachanami lema hagba tzarach hutzahi. Maybe I should argue in the Resha that when I picked up the purse, in case one I picked up the purse, case two I dragged it. In case one, when I pick up the purse to steal the money, maybe I should argue that it's hagba letzorech hutzah, that I'm picking it up so that I can leave your house. It's two parts of one action. You're right, they're not simultaneous, but we view them in their sequence of one to the next. We view them as one entity. That's how we look at it. So it says the Gemara, maybe we should say that it's Hagba Tzarach Hutzai. Says the Gemara, Hacha b'may askinan, what are we dealing with over here? Really, when I went into your house to pick up the purse, I wasn't planning on taking it out of your house. I picked up the purse. I was going to hide it in the cushions so that you couldn't find it. And then after Shabbos, I would come get it. So it's Higbio Manas Lahatznio v'nimlach alav hotzio. And I changed my mind. So what's the flow of events? So let's say that I wanted to steal your keys. So I go into your house. I'm looking around. No one's looking. My first step, I pick up your keys. That's my Hagba. Not for the sake of hotzah. I just want to hide it. So you don't know. I'm going to put them inside. You don't know where they are now. So I've stolen them. I picked it up. I did it Kenyan Hagba, but I specifically did not intend to leave the house. Remember, by Shabbos, we have a principle called Maseches Machsheves, that we need to do our activities. If you're going to violate Shabbos, you got to do it right. You got to have the right intentions. So here, when I picked up the keys, it wasn't to leave the house. So it says the Gemara, maybe that's our case. Maybe 5-6 lines from the bottom on Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph. Maybe it's Kegon Shabil Manasla Tzniyo. And then I picked it up for the sake of hiding it. And then I'm like, you know what? Instead of hiding it, I'm going to steal your car right now. I changed my mind, and then I left. Oh, so maybe that's why in the ratio we're going to be chayev, because I changed my mind after the Hagba. Initially, I did the Hagba for the sake of hiding it, but then I changed my mind. Says the Gemara, that's not Maseches Machsheves. V'chi hai gavna mi mechayev. Would you in fact be chayev in such a case? Absolutely not. Ve'amar of Simon, Amar of Ami, Amar of Yochanan. Hamefana chafatzim mizavis lezavis v'nim lachalem v'hotzi and pater. If I pick up something to move it from one side of my house to the other, I pick up a folding chair. And I said, you know what, lunch is over. I'm going to take the folding chair, Shabbos. I'm going to walk downstairs. But before I do that, I changed my mind. You know what? I'm not going to put it away. I'm going to bring it outside. You're putter in that case. That's not an Isser Doraisa. It's an Isser Darabanan. You're putter. Why? 3 lines from the bottom. Shelo hoyesa akira misha rishona lekach. When you picked it up, your akira was not an akira al tilchol Shabbos. The only time you violate Hotzah is when your akira was for the sake of violating the Isser Hotzah. But here you didn't do that. I picked up the chair to put it away in the storage room. But then I changed my mind after I picked it up. So you can't say that the reason why we're chayiv in this brisa, in the ratio of the brisa, where I pick up your item first and then eat the chaylev later, you can't say that that's because my akira was an unintentional akira. That doesn't work. So it responds the Gemara, Lo temal manasla tzniyo. We need to correct the language of the brisa. It wasn't that you picked it up to hide it. Ela almanas, ela ema almanas lehotzio, to take it out, and in fact you would be chayiv. Hacha b'maya skinan. What then would we be dealing with in that case if the language of the brisa was as is? Kishe omad. That's when I made my akira. So I do an akira over here, right? I pick it up. I'm walking. That's my akira, but then I decide to stop. Kishe omad. Asks the Gemara. Kishe omad lemai. Why did you stop? Ilikatef. If the reason why you stopped was to adjust the package, it's so heavy, you got to get a better grip. So you stop and you're like, hold on, that's not considered stopping. Ilikatef. If the pause in your walking was simply to adjust the packages that you're holding, that's urchehu, that's normal akira language. That's normal. That's a normal activity. And in fact, it's not even viewed halachically as if you've stopped, because your stopping is only so that you can carry better. That's normal, and you'd still be chayiv on that. Ella maybe be'omed lafush. I'm not stopping to readjust the packaging. I'm stopping because I'm exhausted. So now when I stop, it's a very heavy package. Okay, so I take my keys. They're 1,000 pounds, 100 pounds. I'm walking. Oh, this is exhausting. I'm going to take a 30-second break. That is considered a real pause, and therefore your akira has now been interrupted. And when you start walking again, it's a new akira. So says the Gemara, Avalakatef mai. What then would have been the din if I only stopped in order to adjust the packaging? Says the Gemara, I would have been putter. that would have been viewed as one singular activity, because my akira for the Geneva, I only stopped to readjust, but my first akira is still in place, and then I went out. The halacha is it should be pater, top of Lamed Aleph on the base. Says the Gemara, if what you're saying is that lakatef versus lafush is the distinction to make in when you stopped walking, then the Brisa should have showed that distinction. Adatani, when the Brisa wrote in the Seifa, Haya megarer v'yotze pater, it should have been niflog v'nisnei bedida. The Brisa should have shown the following distinction. When would we say that you're pater for dragging an item out of the house? You're only going to be pater, but you're only going to be chayiv if you're omed lafush, if you stopped in order to rest. Aval lekatef, if you only stopped in order to adjust packages, you should be pater. So therefore, the Gemara says, Elohamani, who then is the author of our brisa, who says that you are going to be chayiv in the case of grabbing chaylev and then only eating it late, grabbing a purse. You did a hagbah and then you ate it later. So it says the Gemara, Elohamani ben Azai. Ben Azai has a wild shita. And that is that walking is a pause every step. He says, "The Amar mehalech ka'omei dami." Every time you take a step, it's as if you stopped at that. Every time your foot hits the floor, stop, new action. You take another step, it's a new action. It's another akira. That's the shita of Ben Azai. It says the Gemara. That's a great distinction. In fact, in Maseches Shabbos, we have this idea that if you have an item that has, let's say, like our modern day, number 2 pencils are like an octagon or whatever, 6 sides. What is that? Septagon? What do they call it? Hexagon. That's what they're called. So let's say you take a pencil and you roll it, and it lands on its new face. That's not considered rolling. Each step is a new thing. Same thing by walking. That's how Ben Azai views walking. So if you take a step, every step is a new action. So if that's true, says the Gemara about Zorek Mai. So let's say, according to Ben Azai, who agrees that every step is a break in your action, but throwing, you get a good spiral on the ball. Fantastic. That's for sure going to be considered one activity. So then if that's true, then Ben Azai should have showed the following distinction in our Mishnah. He would have said it's pater. And if that's true, then our Brisa should have had a different answer of niflog v'nisni bedida. He would have said that if it's mahalech, then because every step that you take is new, every akira is new, therefore your geneva and your violation of Shabbos are at different times. So then if that's true, says the Gemara, we have to give a better answer to explain the brisa that we learned on the bottom of Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph. What's that? Megarer v'yosef istrachale. We needed to teach the second case of the brisa of Megarer v'yosef for the following reason. Sal kadaita chamina in derech hotza bekach kamash malan. I might have thought that if I'm dragging a string that is, if I have a string that's holding on to the purse that I'm stealing, that's not normal hotza. And we would not penalize someone for abnormal hotzah. For example, we know that when a person carries on Shabbos, the Gemara Maseches Shabbos records this, that if one person carries, it's normal, and if 2 people carry, it's abnormal. So the tzava in Eretz Yisrael, they rely on these kulas, that because they're an army, it's different world. So when they're for pikuach nefashos, they have to carry things, and it's really a place where they shouldn't be carrying. They have 2 people carry them. The from people do at least, because that way it's you snuck under the radar of Hilchos Shabbos. 2 people, it's not a normal way to carry. Here too, it's not normal. Who carries things by dragging things? That's not normal. Pick it up. That's not normal. So maybe Havamina that you would say that dragging is an abnormal way to violate Kamash Malan, that it is considered a normal way to violate Shabbos. Asks the Gemara, Ubemai. Well, doesn't it depend on what you're dragging? If you're dragging something that's 1,000 pounds, you can't pick up 1,000 pounds. It's normal. Pushing and pulling is much better than picking up. You don't want to get a hernia when you're a thief. So it says the Gemara, it's normal to carry things that are very heavy. And if the thing weighs 2 pounds, why are you dragging it? Pick it up. That's not normal. And that's lav urchei. For sure you'd be pater in such a case. So when we say that it's considered carrying by dragging and it's still normal, it depends on what you're doing. What then are we dealing with in this case? Says the Gemara, El b'mitzeh, we're dealing with something that's kind of in the middleweight territory. So you are strong enough to carry 50 pounds. You're not strong enough to carry 70 pounds. So it's a 70-pound object. It's not 1,000 pounds. That's for sure normal to carry that, to drag that. And it's not 2 pounds because it's abnormal to drag. It's in the middle. And that's what the Brisa is coming to indicate. Then the Gemara raises a big problem. I don't understand. If you're taking something out of one rishus, of my rishus hayachid, you're stealing from me, and you're bringing it into the rishus harabim, is there a kinyan that way? Can I make a kinyan on your object by going from rishus hayachid to Rishus Harabim. Well, the Rishus Harabim is not mine. It's different, but does going over the threshold from Rishus Hayachid to public domain, can I make a kinyan in a public domain? So says the Gemara, Ude afke lehecha. When I take that thing out of your house, where am I bringing it to such that I made a kinyan? Ide afke l'Rishus Harabim. If I take something out of your house, from your house to the public domain, well, then in that case, Isser Shabbos Ika, yes, for sure. As it relates to Shabbos, I violated Hotzah, because Hotzah is going from Rishus Hayachid to Rishus Harabim. But Isser Gneva Leka, but that's not considered theft. Why? Because I can't make a kinyan on your item in a public domain. That's not my domain. I can't steal your items that way. And says the Gemara, if I'm stealing from your backyard into my backyard, it's Rishus Hayachid to Rishus Hayachid, then Isser Gneva Ika, granted, I stole and I went from your yard to my yard. However, Isser Shabbos Leka. But that's not a violation of Hilchos Shabbos, because I only went from Rishus Hayachid to Rishus Hayachid. So the Gemara is like pulling the carpet out from under the whole sugya. What do you mean you stole by taking it out of Rishus Hayachid to Rishus Harabim? You can't do that. How, asks the Gemara, do we have a scenario of two things happening in one moment of theft and the violation of Shabbos if your theft took place from Rishus Hayachid to Rishus Harabim? Great question. It's a great question. It's a kinyanim question. How do you make a kinyan on someone else's product in a Rishus Harabim? Michael, you had a question?
No.
Good. Good. So third of the way down, the Gemara tries to answer this question, and we have two different approaches. Lo tzricha te'afke letzidei Rishus Harabim. There is a third category. Rishus Harabim, says the Gemara, you're right. No kinyanim in Rishus Harabim. Rishus Hayachid, you're right. No violation of Shabbos. Right. So what then? How do we thread the needle here? How is it that I can bring something out of your house and outside of that house into a different domain and do two things at once, violate Hilchos Shabbos and Geneva? Says the Gemara, it's when you bring it from someone's house into Tzidei Rishus Harabim, the sides of the Rishus Harabim. We learned about this a couple of days ago with Chipufe, that there are borders, there were like these curbs that they had so that the wagons wouldn't ruin the retaining walls of whatever was there. So they put up curbs. We have curbs too. We don't want people to drive on the sidewalk. So we put up curbs. Great idea. So the Gemara says, there you have kinyanim. So if I go from your house and you live in a place where it's leaving your house is Tzidei Rishus Harabim on the sides, not the main thoroughfare, but on the side, it's Tzidei Rishus Harabim, or what we will see soon is called a simta, which is like an alleyway. Then the Gemara says you can make a kinyan there. Ask the Gemara Ukiman, whose shita is that like? Ike Rabbi Eliezer da Amar Tzidei Rishus Harabim Kirshus Harabim Damo. Oh, there's a machlokas about Tzidei Rishus Harabim. According to Belazar, the sides of the Rishus Harabim are the same as the Rishus Harabim. So according to him, Mr. Shabbos Ike Yisr Gneva Leka. That doesn't work. Then we're still missing something because it's still Kirshus Harabim. And that, if that's the case, says the Gemara, Ike Rabbanan, what about the rabbis who argue with Rabbi Elazar, Damar Tzidei Rishus Harabim Lav, Kirshus Harabim Dam, then Isser Gneva Ika, but Isser Shabbos Leka. If it's the Tzidei Rishus Harabim are not like the Rishus Harabim, then okay, you have Gneva, but while you have Gneva, you don't have Isser Shabbos. So says the Gemara, how do we have the case scenario where when I steal from your house and go out of the Rishus Hayachid, how do we have the case scenario that I violate Shabbos and Geneva? Bevas achas. Le'olam, says the Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer. Really, the shita is like Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that Tzidei Rishus Harabim is Kirshus Harabim. When Rabbi Eliezer says that the sides of a Rishus Harabim are like a Rishus Harabim, that's not across the boards. That's true only in regards to the Isser Shabbos. Because sometimes when it's very crowded, people will walk over there. But in regards to kinyanim, we view the Tzidei Rishus Harabim as eligible for kinyanim, and he's threaded the needle perfectly. Says the Gemara, my time. Why is this true? Because while it's true that sometimes the Rabbim are there, that there are people there, it's not commonplace, and therefore we have different halachos for Tzidei Rishus Harabim as it relates to Hilchos Shabbos and as it relates to kinyanim. Rav Ashi gives a bit of a different answer over here, and he says, he put his hand below 3 tfachim, and he dragged it from the house into his hand. So therefore, you went from Rishus Hayachid into your own hand, which is considered a different location. And in turn, this then creates a scenario of Shnayin Haban Ke'echad, of violating Hilchos Shabbos and Geneva at the same time. Now we have a question of psak. How do we paskin in regards to the tzidei reshut, in regards to kinyanim in reshus harabim? So it says the Gemara as follows: Rav Acha masni hachi. Rav Acha taught the din like we just learned, and he holds that there is no kinyan meshicha in reshus harabim. Ravina masni, Ravina masni laolam de'afke l'reshus harabim u'b'reshus harabim nami kana, and there really is a kinyan in reshus harabim. So this remains a machlokas, and the Gemara says v'tarvai b'diyuka dahamas nisin kamiflage. These two Amoraim are dealing with how to understand the following Mishnah. What does the Mishnah say? 2/3 of the way down, Lamed Aleph Amid Beis, heading toward the two dots. Ditnan. I'm in your field. I'm in the middle of stealing a cow. And what did I do? I was moshcho v'yotze. I put a rope around the animal. I put a leash on, and I'm trying to take the animal out. Umeis birshus bailim. Your animal dies in your property. A very bad thief. Says the Gemara, pater. You are going to be pater. Okay. If I pick up your animal, so then it's not a cow. Let's just go smaller. Let's go sheep or goat. So if I steal your animal and I pick it up and I take it out of your shus, then then you're chayev. What are the diyukim that each of the Amoraim make here? Ravina daik mi reisha, Ravacha daik mi seifa. Ravina makes a diyuk from the reisha. What's Ravina's diyuk? Ravina daik mi reisha, hayamoshcho the yotze umeis birshus bailim pater. I do mashicha on your animal, and I take it out, and it dies in your property pater. Taima de meis birshus bailim. That's because it died in your property. Hahotzio mershus bailim umeis chayev. Then we'd say that one is chayev, and that seems to be that your kinyan mashicha into a reshus harabim works. And therefore you'd be chayev. Ravacha diik mi seifa. He makes an inference from the seifa. He bio osho otzio. When I'm carrying a smaller animal, hotza dumya dehagba. That my hotza, that I take something out of your property, has to be similar to the hagba. Ma hagba da'asi l'reshuse. Just like a hagba, when I pick it up, it goes from your property to mine. Af hotza nami da'asi l'reshuse. So then hotza has to be the same way, and therefore going into reshus harabim, there would be no kinyan meshicha. Says the Gemara, that's all fine and good. Yes?
Is there an Indian of Dalit and Hay? If it's a smaller animal?
Dalit and Hay is by Tavach u'machar. So if I steal an animal, so the halacha is that I have to pay you back kefil. Your animal's $100, I owe you 200. Dalit ve'hei is a din in Chumash that if I sell or slaughter your animal, then I have to pay you back 4 or 5. So there's different gradations of the severity of what you did. If I only steal it, I have to give it back at 100% fine. But if I shecht or sell your animal, that's much worse. So 4 and 5 times. That's what the Torah writes. So not here. Here we're not even talking about kefil. It's like the step before the consequence. It's like the mechanics of the theft more than that. But yes, one would be chayiv kefil in a case like this. So then the Gemara is bothered. Well, if the reisha is implied like one of the Amoraim, and the seifa implies like another Amora, then the Gemara says 8 lines from the bottom, reisha the Ravacha, L'Rav Acha kasha reisha and the Ravina kasha seifa. If I can make an inference in one direction from the reisha and an opposite one from the seifa, that's a problem. Says the Gemara, no. Reisha L'Rav Acha lo kasha kama de lo asi the reshus bailim karina be. As long as I don't enter into your reshus, the ganav's reshus, it's still going to be in reshus bailim. And seifa the Ravina lo kasha, and the seifa is not a problem for Ravina. Hotza dum yadagba lo amrina. We don't paskin like that hotza dum yadagba. We don't say that the hotza and the agba have to be the same. So that's how the Gemara concludes here. And sikum hadvarim is that we learned about a couple of different cases dealing with kinyanim. How do we view kinyanim? How do we create scenarios of shnaim habayin ke'echad, the ability to take something which is both theft and a violation of Hilchos Shabbos in the same moment, when it does work out that they're simultaneous, or at least halachically simultaneous. So then the halacha is and we would apply kamle b'derabamine. Otherwise, we would not. Wishing you all a beautiful day.